All right, so thank you for joining today's webinar, Improving the Productivity and Climate Resilience of South Australian Sheep Flock. My name is Jodie Rizzo O'Brien and I'm one of the Sheep Connect SA team. Sheep Connect is supported by the Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund and the Department of Primary Industries and Regions. For more information on Sheep Connect, you can go to the website sheepconnect.com.au or you can follow us on Twitter. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll upload the recording to the Sheep Connect SA YouTube channel and website in the coming days. We welcome you to revisit the webinar or share it with colleagues. Today's presenter is Associate Professor Will van Wettere from the University of Adelaide. Will's an Associate Professor within the University of Adelaide School of Animal and Veterinary Science. He's been conducting trials to improve reproductive output in production animals for almost 20 years, with a focus primarily on sheep reproduction for the past 7 years, and as you can see here, previously on pigs, and combines both basic and adoption research strategies to improve flock weaning rate. Introduce Will to give tonight's webinar. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Jodie. And thank you for this opportunity to present the work that we're doing currently. The focus of my talk today is the research we're doing around, as Jodie said, working out ways to try and improve the productivity and the climate resilience of the SA sheep flock. Before I go through what we're going to do, I just want to take a minute to thank everyone who's involved. I'd like to thank the SA Sheep Industry Fund, the SA Drought Hub, and the producer groups who have made this work possible. So funding for this work is from the SA Sheep Industry Funds and the SA Drought Hub. And of course, the producers who gave us access to their sheep and their facilities and also provided us with some help and advice and sense-checked some of my slightly crazier ideas. And of course, the team of people who have worked on the project. So all the work I'm presenting today or discussing today is being done by a fair number of people, okay, from students through to me, and also kindly supported by people like Professor Wayne Pitchford and Dr. Stephen Lee as well. So I thought I'd just give you a little outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start off talking about the impact and the cost of heat on sheep flocks. And after I've done that, I'm going to focus on the research we are doing. There's two main components to my talk, really. One is the work we're doing to understand how heat impacts reproduction. And the second is the work we're doing to try and reduce the impact of heat on weaning rates. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what is the impact of heat stress on the Australian sheep flock? At this point, I run the risk of teaching people producers to suck eggs a little bit. But if we work on the premise that weaning rate is the ultimate outcome of sheep production or sheep reproduction, and if you just focus on the components of what affects weaning rate, if we think about around joining, we think the ram has a huge impact on pregnancy rates based on his ability, the good quality of the sperm he produces, the number of sperm, his libido. The ewe affects pregnancy rates and weaning rates based on whether she actually expresses estrus, how long she's on heat for, how many eggs she shed, so the ovulation rate, and how many of those eggs become embryos and then implant and become fetuses. If we then move a bit further down the track and we look at how the ewe contributes to things during pregnancy, so pregnancy conditions, so uterine environment, restrictions on uterine growth, and nutrition all affect pregnancy outcomes. The ewe's ability to look after the lambs affects pregnancy outcomes and weaning rates. And when it comes to the lamb, the birth weight of the lamb, generally larger lambs survive better. Thermoregulability of the lamb and its vitality at birth all affect how many of them survive and make it through to weaning. And the reality of this is, while direct management and implemented by producers can have a huge impact on weaning rate, all of these processes from semen quality through to the duration of estrus through to lamb birth weight are impacted by the environment or the climate in which the animals exist. We know from the literature that every day above 32.2 degrees during the week of joining can potentially decrease the number of lambs born by about 3.5%. And we also know from a large number of intensive studies that heat stress during pregnancy can decrease lamb birth weight by anything from 16 to 36% and decrease weaning rate by about 20 to 30%. So there's a big impact of the environment on weaning rate. And we've modeled the financial impacts of this, and we've worked out that the cost, at a rough estimate, the cost of heat stress to the Australian sheep industry under the current climate is around $170 million per year. Under fairly conservative models of climate change, we expect this to increase to $203 million per year at a 1 degree Celsius increase in global warming, and about 280 million per year at a 3 degree Celsius increase in global warming. And then the other work I've done is I've put together some probably more local impact of heat stress. So we've kind of put together some figures around what is the impact and cost of heat stress to South Australian sheep flocks. So it's very simple. What I did was I calculated days per week above 32 during the standard, probably joining period of December through to February. I then calculated the impact on lambing rate. And I've done this for the average year for the last 50 or just under 50 years, and for the hottest year in the last 50 years. And you can see that the impact of heat stress during the week of joining for someone like Kankata is on average about a 13% reduction in lambing rate, through to Keith down the southeast, which is around an 8% decrease. And then if you look at the hottest years, you can see for the hottest year, we would estimate about a 20% reduction in potential lambing rate as a result of heat stress during the week of joining. And even down in Keith, where it's traditionally a bit cooler, you can see the impact is still quite high during the hotter years. Now, what I then did is I looked across and actually worked out the financial impact of this. So I based this on basically when roughly 100 ewes, so if you take 100 ewes and are exposed to days above 32 in those areas during their week of joining, again, for the average year and the hottest year. I did this based on a lamb price of around $130 and a normal lambing rate of around 140%. Well, scanning rate of 140%. And you can see that on average years, heat stress could be estimated to be costing around $2,000 for those 100 ewes, and a hot year up to about $3,000. And even again, down in the southeast, you're looking at a $1,200 impost for 100 ewes, up to $2,300 impost. So it's quite a severe impact for 100 ewes. So now I've I think, gone through the impact of heat stress. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we're doing to try and understand what the impact is at a physiological and behavioural and reproduction level. So if we accept that the environment has a huge impact, the environment impacts the physiology of the animal. So it affects, when the animal gets hot and experiences temperatures that it can't really cope with, it enacts physiological responses. It alters where its blood flows to, so it moves its blood to the periphery. It increases its respiration rate to cool and relieve heat. Hormonal changes occur to help facilitate this process. The animal also elicits behavioral responses to help keep it cool. So things like seeking shade, inactivity, reducing feed intake, and how the behavior of the animal, and this is where it becomes difficult to assess what's actually going on. The behavior of the animal in response to heat modifies their physiological response. The physiological response modifies their behavioral response. And how these things interact to help cool the animal and the extent with which the animal can achieve some degree of thermoregulation modifies the impact of heat on reproduction, welfare, and growth, and ultimately flock productivity, efficiency, and sustainability. Okay. So if we just come back to this picture again, so weaning rate, it's all affected by heat. The work that we're trying to do within my group is to try and reduce the impact of climate on weaning rate. And there's three rough components of this, one of which is trying to quantify the impact of heat stress on weaning rate at the farm level, so on farms. The second is to try and understand individual variation in thermoregulation, and I'll explain why we believe that's important a bit later on. And the third component is to try and develop ways to increase heat tolerance. So if we can understand the impact of heat on farms, if we can understand the impact of heat on individuals, we can then try and work out ways to actually increase their heat tolerance as well.
Will, can I just interrupt you there? Just had a clarification come through about the 32 degrees. So can you just explain, just go over why that number, so like where that is? So that's the minimum, maximum, just explain that 32 degrees further.
It's the day above, it's when a day goes above 32 degrees. It's the days that were chosen by the literature that has been research that's been done already. For Southern Australia, that generally seems to coincide with a thermal humidity index of around 71 to 72, which is when we expect some degree of moderate heat stress to occur. Does that answer the question?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So it's not completely arbitrary. It's based around when we believe animals start to become challenged.
Excellent.
All right, so now I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about the work we're doing. Again, I mean, it's a common problem for me. I tend to talk too fast. So Jodie, please feel free to tell me to slow down if you need to. So we're doing a body of work at the moment, funded, again, like I've said, by the Sheep Industry Fund and the SA Drought Hub, to try and reduce the impact of heat on weaning rates. We're doing this work across research centres, so at Roseworthy, and also some of the Sardi sites, so Turretfield Research Centre in particular. And we're working within about 26 commercial sheep flocks across SA. We're trying to understand variation in thermoregulation in both ewes and rams and how this impacts their fertility in response to heat. We're trying to further our understanding of the climatic thresholds at which fertility is compromised. And then the third aspect, which we'll talk about a bit later, is the commercially adoptable strategies we're working on to improve thermoregulation and improve fertility. So we know from a lot of animal health studies that animals and people vary in their ability to thermoregulate during heat. This has been based on work where they've exposed animals to extensive periods of heat and often extreme heat. And also the only other issue we have this work, and they've shown very large variation how animals can maintain their temperature. Some can maintain a low temperature at 40 degrees, some fail to do so. Some of the issues we have around this, obviously, the animals were intensively housed, and also they use rectal temperature. And we have data that shows quite clearly that every time you collect rectal temperature from an animal, their temperature elevates because it's a stress response. So that temperature measure may not be that accurate. What we know from this work is that a proportion of rams will maintain a lower scrotal temperature, and these animals tend to be more fertile during periods of heat or following periods of heat. And we know that ewes which maintain a lower temperature produce larger lambs as well. And so the question we have, and we're trying to research, is how does this variation relate to fertility of extensively managed sheep, and is it relevant within the climate, or the less extreme and the less consistent heat that sheep will see in a paddock? So the question really is, how is ram fertility and semen quality affected by this variation in thermoregulation? And in ewes, how is their fertility and fecundity affected, and how are their lamb characteristics affected by their temperature and during periods of heat? So I just thought I would provide some of the literature that supported this as well, supported this research question. So a number of studies, and there's actually a fair few of them back in the late 1970s through to the 1990s. If you put them all together, it shows about each 1 degree increase in ewe rectal temp during high temperatures decreases lamb birth weight by about 1.5 kilograms. And ewes which reared a lamb tended to have lower rectal temperatures. And you can see this fairly clearly from this graph on the right-hand side of this screen. So the top one shows animals that were selected or identified as having, with the open bars, are low rectal temperature at selection and a high temperature at selection. So open is low temperature, black is high temperature. And you can see that at selection, even when they were selected before they were joined, there was some relationship between that rectal temperature and birth weight of the lambs, because you can see it's going down as rectal temperature goes up. And then when they measured rectal temperature during pregnancy, you can see there is a much closer alignment in the way down between animals with a low rectal temperature have higher lambs, larger lambs, and ewes with a higher rectal temperature have smaller lambs. So the relationship is fairly clear. So what we are doing is we are trying to measure temperature in free-ranging animals in the paddock setting. So we've gone down the path of using remote technologies. So when we talk about remote technology in this context, it's nothing particularly fancy, to be fair. We're using quite a small, about the size of a raspberry bullet, temperature logger. It's very accurate. It can measure temperature and record temperature every 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, or up to however long we program it for. It can last for 2 years in the animal. And we've created what basically is a modified cedar. So it's a blank cedar. It has no progesterone in it, and it has a space in it here for the temperature logger to go into. So it pretty much looks exactly like a cedar. We can then apply it and put it in the animal using a cedar applicator, and it can go into the vagina of the animal just like a normal cedar, and we leave them in there for about 2 weeks to 12 to 14 days. And then we take them out and we can download the temperature, and we can see how it varies in relation to ambient temperature. So at the moment, we have data that we're analysing from about 200 ewes from an AI program in the Barossa, so at Turretfield. We have data from 300 naturally joined ewes at Roseworthy, and we have data from ewes in commercial flocks across SA, so Katawi, Ettrick and moorlands. I don't have a lot of data on this to present, but I have put together some of the range in temperatures that we are seeing. So here on the y-axis, you have vaginal temperature. On the right, on the x-axis, I have minimum temperature, maximum temperature, and mean temperature. And you can see for minimum temperature of the animal, it ranges anything. This is across the population from around about just over 36.5 up to just above 38.5. So about a 2-degree range in minimum temperature of an animal during summer, of animals during summer, that's the population. And you can see here for the maximum temperature the population of animals reaches varies anything from close to 41 and down to 39.5. So animals vary in their maximum temperature during periods of heat by about 1.3 degrees. And the mean temperature range is over about 1 degree. So there is a fair degree of variation within the populations of the sheep that we are working with. The other interesting data I have is that we have also, similar to the earlier work, we've selected animals. Well, I say we, one of my PhD students, Bobby, selected animals based on their temperature during 3 days of 32 degrees. And she allocated them to either being in the low temperature or a high temperature group based on how their temperature changed. And then she has measured temperature in these animals, vaginal temperature at periods all the way through their synchrony, so pre-AI, and all the way through pregnancy as well. And here is just some of the data we have. So on the y-axis on the left, you have vaginal temperature. On the y-axis on the right, we have ambient temperature, and this is over a 24-hour period. The dashed line is ambient temperature. Predictably, it's a fairly hot day. You can see that it goes up during the day and comes down again. What's interesting is that these two groups, they stay roughly the same in their vaginal temperature until about 8 o'clock in the morning. Then when the heat starts to go up, you can see that the cooler group maintains a lower temperature all the way through the day, and then comes back during the nighttime, and the high temperature group stay higher during the day as well. So they're selecting animals based on temperature. They remain in these groups all the way through and through their reproductive cycle. And the only other data I have to put alongside this is that preliminary data suggests that ewes with lower temperature during periods of heat do have a higher ovulation rate. So there does appear to be an effect of animals that can thermoregulate better do seem to shed more eggs. Now we're also working at the other side of the coin. So we're also doing a lot of work around quantifying the impact of heat on ram fertility. We have temperature loggers in the scrotum and the axilla of rams on research sites, so Thurrockfield and Roseworthy, and on commercial farms as well. And we're currently analysing data from these trials. So basically, it's not actually that, I was going to say it's not that invasive, but it's not a particularly long process. We sedate the ram, we put them on an AI cradle, give them a lot of local anaesthetic and some antibiotics, obviously. And the whole process probably takes about 10 to 15 minutes. A temperature logger goes in underneath the armpit, and another one goes into the scrotum. And we're going to relate this temperature data to the ram fertility when they're joined with ewes during summer. So we're working with producers who are DNA testing. We're also working, we've done some single star matings as well. We're also collecting semen sequentially during summer from animals to look at how semen quality, so motility, number of sperm, etc., changes with their thermoregulatory ability. And ultimately, I guess if we do see that there's a difference between their ability to regulate scrotal temp and this manifests as differences in their fertility, we're going to look at simple, more commercially achievable measures of scrotal temp. So one thing we are looking at is the use of thermographic camera to measure surface temperature. We can then hopefully correlate that with internal scrotal temperature. And if we can develop a good correlation, we can get away with this process and just hopefully use cameras to try and identify rams that can thermoregulate better or worse, and potentially use that as a selection protocol or a criteria for these rams. The good news we have from the data so far is that there definitely is variation between rams and their ability to maintain scrotal temp. So again, on the y-axis, we have ambient temperature. And these are just different days, and you can see these are over fairly hot days. The top lines, this is data from 2 rams. You can see here, this is the axilla temperature, so under the armpit. You see it varies a little bit, and it follows changes in ambient temperature. But if we go down here and look at scrotal temperature, you can see that the ram with the green bars his scrotal temperature gets much higher than the other ram at the same temperature. And so his ability to maintain scrotal temperature is probably reduced. And the interesting question we'll have is whether this does relate to fertility measures. The other aspect of the work we're doing is because, like I said earlier, the physiological response and the behavioral response are interrelated. So how an animal cools itself will affect its reproductive rate and will affect its response to heat. So we have ewes and rams with GPS collars on, wandering around paddocks. They have temperature sensors in them, and then we can work out where they are in a paddock at any particular time. And hopefully this video works. And this will just show you how we can map how they move around a paddock and relate that to temperature and relate their movement to what resources they're making use of. So access to water, spending time in shade and things like that. And then we can relate that to their change in their body temperature as well. Okay, so I think it's fairly clear that there is a lot of variation between ewes and rams in their ability to thermoregulate or maintain a temperature during summer in South Australia. And there appears to be some relationship in terms of their fertility, so ovulation rate. And what we will find out is whether this manifests in differences in birth weight, pregnancy rates, and as well for the ram, it manifests in differences in their fertility. And I think by doing this, if we can understand this variation in ewe and ram thermoregulation, it does provide us an opportunity to select as a phenotypic level, so just using a camera or using a temperature sensor to see which animals can maintain scrotal temp in the ram's instance, or going forward, look and see if there's a genotypic selection potential there as well. So now that brings me to the end of that aspect, which is probably a bit more theoretical. Yeah.
Before we move on to the research, I've just got a question here about the stuff you've just presented. Is there any ideas on how to select ewes that maintain a lower temperature?
No. Well, in theory, you could. So I think what we would like to do next is, if we can demonstrate there is a relationship, is to see how early we can do this in their life, for example. If we can use an early criteria, and there's probably are going to be genetic relationships, I suspect, between the two, which we can probably, but that's probably a long way off. The interesting aspect will be if we can select ewes at a very young age for this, basically, I guess, going forward. And I think potentially for selecting animals for AI, if that might be another option as well. Does that make sense? So you'd select your cooler animals for AI because they're more likely to get pregnant as one of your aspects, I guess.
Yep. Great. And I've got one more.
Yeah.
How does diet affect body temperature? Can you give some insights into that?
Yes. So this is the irony of life. So obviously animals slow down and reduce their intake when it's hot because they don't want to increase their body temperature, because digestion, rumination increases temperature, metabolic rate, etc. Right? So they reduce their intake. The irony is that the higher the fiber, so the more roughage they intake, increases metabolic rate more, obviously, than a concentrate diet. And during summer, they're typically eating more roughage, I suspect. Right. So yeah, that is how diet affects it. So a more concentrate diet is one way, is potentially you could reduce metabolic rate in these animals. Does that answer it?
That's great. Thank you. No worries. We'll move in the next step. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the next aspect I'm going to talk about, so we're working within about, well, it says 25, but it's actually 26 commercial sheep flocks to work out adoptable strategies to improve thermoregulation and fertility. And these are very adoption-focused studies. We're looking at intervention strategies we're fairly confident will increase the capacity of the sheep to tolerate heat. So we've chosen melatonin. It's a potent antioxidant. So in addition to sending a signal about what time of year it is to the animal, it also works as an antioxidant. And at higher levels, it does appear to decrease core temperature in humans and potentially cows, actually. We've also chosen a vitamin A, D, and E drench, which we believe will increase embryo survival. Both of these products have been tested on farms, basically. So it's commercial validation and adoption-focused research. Okay, so like I said, melatonin, it's a potent antioxidant. The reason why this is important is that the main byproduct of heat stress is free radicals in the body, and these disrupt normal cellular functioning. Antioxidants such as melatonin act to reduce these free radicals and therefore offset the negative impacts of heat stress. And again, melatonin does facilitate heat dissipation, so it increases blood supply at the skin levels, which helps dissipate heat, clearly. The melatonin we're using is the Regulin. which you should all, I'm assuming everyone is aware of. It's an implant. It's commercially available. It's an 18 milligram capsule sold by Seva. Supplemented use as a single subcutaneous injection. Costs about $6.60 to $6.90. We've changed when we're giving it though, compared to what people would normally use. We're giving it at joining because we believe it lasts, but we know it lasts up to 100 days. And by giving it a joining, it means it's going to be active, melatonin levels will be raised for longer during pregnancy, which we think will be beneficial for fetal growth and placental growth, especially during periods of heat. Vitamin A, D, and E we have chosen because combined they have strong antioxidant properties. Vitamin A has a key role in embryo implantation and development. It's an essential vitamin for embryo development. Vitamin D, it helps increase endometrial thickness. And there is some evidence that use with naturally higher levels of vitamin D are more fertile. And vitamin E increases sperm quality in rams and embryo quality in ewes, and it does reduce some of the negative impacts of oxidative stress. So we think that combined, these vitamins will improve pregnancy rates, or we believe they would. Again, we're using a commercially available product. It comes from Maxivit from Compass Foods. It's supplemented as a single oral drench. It costs you about 50 cents per 10 ml dose. It's 10 mils we give per ewe. And we're administering it at joining or up to 2 weeks before joining. And we believe it lasts for up to about 12 weeks. So it keeps levels up for about 12 weeks. So this work is being conducted across about 12,500 ewes. It's probably closer to about 13,500. A third of these ewes, roughly, these are rough figures, are receiving Regulin, and a third receiving AD&E, with these treatments matched on site. So within a property, we have animals with Regulin or controls. In some sites, we have AD and a control. In some sites, we have all three being tested on the same site. We have about 85 rams on trial, with half receiving Regulin. And the sites are spread across South Australia, so up from Lameroo through the Eyre Peninsula, through, which I can never pronounce, Wettere, Georgetown, Kyneton, Kadji, Ningbull, Murray Bridge, Tunkillo, Carrington, and then Spalding, Katawi, and Orroroo. So it's a fair spread across the state. And what we're also doing as part of this, we're not just looking at the effect of these supplements on ewe fertility, we're also trying to measure microclimate within the paddocks that they're joining in as well. So we have little temperature sensors, which if you just look at these group of rams, you can just see the little temperature sensor sticking up beside them. Sheep being sheep, they like to chew everything. And we've measured, basically, we've got fairly accurate climate data for the farms where we've worked. So if we looked at these areas, if we focus primarily on days above 32, you can see that even this summer, where it's fairly mild, days during joining periods above 32 represent about 40% of the days in the Barossa. It's fairly similar for the Barossa, the Eyre Peninsula, Mallee, a lot cooler in the southeast, and the upper north obviously is almost up to 65% of days were above 32 during joining for the trial work we did. So if you do the basic maths from before and you multiply days by days above 32 during the week of joining, we estimated for about 100 ewes, you're looking at about a 10% reduction. For ewes, regardless of how many there were, we would expect a 10% reduction in joining rate as a result of heat through the Barossa, Mallee, a bit lower in the southeast, higher in the upper north as well, obviously, due to those proportion of days above 32. Obviously, the worst case scenario is all days above 32. And so then if we we will now look at the effect of Regulin at joining on pregnancy rate and fetal number at pregnancy scanning. So this is pulled across age groups. We've done a number of age groups, which I'll show you at the end. We've done ewe lambs, we've worked with hoggets, and we've worked with mixed age. So you can see that Regulin has increased pregnancy rate by about 3 or 4%. It's reduced the number of animals having one fetus, so singletons, by about 10%. It's increased the number of fetuses, ewes having 2 fetuses by about 7%, and it's increased the number of 13%. It's increased the number of ewes having multiple fetuses by about 14.5%. So it's quite a big impact. When we then look at the effect on fetuses as a percent of ewe joined, you can see there's about a 19% increase in potential lambing rate from the Regulin. And if you just look at the animals that were pregnant, you can see there's about a 14% increase in fetuses for your pregnant ewes. So there's a a fairly substantial increase as a result of just giving a single shot of injection, a single shot of Regulin at joining. On a couple of farms, we've actually compared the giving it 30 days before joining, which is what is recommended, compared with giving it at joining. So this is just, and we just did this for hoggets and ewe lambs, and I've just pulled the data together. I haven't done stats on this because it's only 2 farms. So just keep that in mind when you look at the data, but you can see that pregnancy rate for a control versus an animal, for pregnancy rates for controls and Regulin 30 days prior to joining are fairly similar. If you do Regulin at joining, it's gone up by 7%. Similarly, you can see that fetal number of single fetuses used with single fetuses have gone down across the treatments. Number of multiple fetuses have gone up with the treatments, but the number of multiple used with multiple fetuses is markedly higher when Regulin is given at joining. And this means that the number of fetuses as a percent of ewes joined is almost 25% higher when you give Regulin at joining compared to 7% if you give it 30 days before. And similarly, there's about a, 16% improvement in ewes pregnant, in fetuses as a representative of ewes pregnant from giving Regulin at joining compared to only a 10% if you give it 30 days pre-joining. So the appear based on this data, and this is the ewe lamb data is for merinos in the north and composite merinos down in the southeast. So there's a big spread. They were both done at the same time, and the hoggets were merinos. So now I just take a minute to show you the impact of the AD&E drench. So I've represented this as the percentage change in outcomes. So obviously 0 is the control, and the blue bars are the difference between the treatment and the control. You can see there's no real difference in pregnancy rate from giving them AD&E. There's a slight decrease, it's not significant, in the number of ewes with a single fetus. There's a slight increase in the ewes with multiple fetuses. Again, not significant, but it's about 4%. Well, not statistically significant anyway. But if then we look at the number of fetuses as a percent of ewes joined, you can see that the AD&E drench across the board is increased that outcome by about 6%, and the number of fetuses as a percent of ewes pregnant has been increased by about 5%, and those both are statistically significant. So I think that's quite a good outcome. And then, knowing my own limitations, I've done a very basic cost-benefit analysis. This is not my forte, but basically what I've done is I've worked this out for 500 ewes joined. I've included the cost per ewe of the supplement, so $6.90 for the Regulin and 50 cents for the AD&E. I've done it in 2 models. I've assumed the cost of production per lamb is around $21 per lamb, and the price received is either about $100 or $140. And then I've calculated the profit, which includes obviously the cost of taking away the cost of implants before that is calculated. So when I separated it for lambs, ewe lambs, hoggets, mature animals, and generally across the board, so regardless of age group, again, these are using the figures we've got. We can see that if you give Regulin to ewe lambs, you get about 84 extra lambs for 500 ewes, 100 for hoggets, 58 for mature, so about 95 if you average it across, and the profit for ewe lambs at a good price for lambs of 140 per lambs is about $6,500, $8,400 for hoggets, $3,400 for mature animals, and average is about $8,000. And even when you're not making much money for lambs, which I think is the current status quo, you're still making money from using the Regulin. It's just not as much. If you then look at the cost benefit of the vitamin AD&E drench, again, obviously the impact is lower, but the cost is lower as too. So you're only getting an extra 30 or 28 lambs from ewe lambs from giving them AD&E, but it only costs you 50 cents per lamb. So your profit is around 3,000 down to 2,000 for when you're getting less per your lambs. And it averages around about 3,300 if you just put it across your whole flock. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk. I hope it's been informative. So basically, just to bring it all to end, really, what we're trying to do is from our work, is trying to improve the reproduction rate and sustainability of the sheep flock, and also understand how behaviour and resource use can affect that. The idea really is to try and understand how heat impacts individuals and flocks, decrease the impact of climate on breeding flocks, and have more resilient sheep and management systems. And the basically approach we're taking is new knowledge, trying to demonstrate that new knowledge on site to facilitate adoption and create practice change and impact. I'd like to thank you for your attention. I can't see that, but you'll do flaky things across it. And again, would like to thank the Sheep Industry Fund and the SA Drought Hub for kindly supporting this work. I'd like to thank the producer groups for helping us find producers and introducing us to producers. And obviously the producers who really have gone above and beyond by giving us access to their sheep and their facilities and supported this work and been really, really very accommodating and supportive. It's been great. We hope to continue this work this coming summer and beyond. And I'm happy to answer any questions, really. Thank you for your attention. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, Will. We've got a few questions coming in. And I'll just remind people, if you've come up with a question, pop it in the Q&A box or in the chat box, or flick me a text and I'll post those to Will. But yeah, please pop those in there. I've got a couple come through, but happy to take a few more, as many as we've got time for. So Will, you talked a bit about the different breeds. Do you want to just recap what breeds you did use in the trials?
Yes, primarily merino. We have done some Doonies. Is it Doonies? Is that how you pronounce it? I can never get it right.
Yeah, correct. Yep, Dooney merinos.
Yeah, and we have also done some work with composites down in the southeast, and we've done a little bit of work with one Dorper site as well. So the Dorper site's not included in this, and sorry, there was another composite site on the Flurio. The data came in today, and the improvement is about 6 to 8% from the Regulin. So it's not as high, but it's still in a positive direction, and it's not included in this data set because it only came through today.
Nothing like trials happening as we speak.
Yeah,
excellent. Well, I had a question here about the effect of wool length on thermoregulation and what,
Yep.
You're better off with shorter, longer wool. Yep.
I think too short. I think the optimum is somewhere between, off the top of my head, I feel like it's between 20, it's about 20 mil, I think. 2 centimeters is optimal for heat. But I'm not making that up, but that's on the top of my head from the stuff I have read. So I can double check that and get back to you, Jodie, if you want.
That'd be great. And the second part of that question, does it affect rams or ewes differently, the length of the wool and their thermoregulation?
I've no idea, but we do have some we are wondering whether scrotal cover has some impact on the rams. So
another research question.
Another research, but I have an interesting answer for you, but I don't know how true it is. So I was at a conference in June, and there's a Spanish person doing a lot of research when they're in this area as well. And they've shown that if you shear the scrotum of the rams, their fertility and libido goes up. Oh, no, he wasn't Spanish, he was South American. So there you go. Maybe it does help thermoregulation and improves their fertility and libido, just shaving their scrotum.
So, there we are. A few producers might be better able to trial that one. Excellent. Another question, following on from the diet question we had earlier about body temperature. So does actually feeding them grain change their temperature, like make them hotter?
Yes, the work has been done. Not here though. I think in Northern Africa, some work has been done around changing diet composition. So moving from a roughage to a more grain-focused diet reduces the heat load of the animal.
Okay.
I don't know if the work has been done here. I'm not aware of it. But it could have been a long time ago.
Excellent. I think that's about it for the moment. If you do have any other questions, flick them through to my email and I'll post them to Will at a later time and we'll get back to you with the answers. I thank everyone for joining today's webinar. Will, thank you for sharing your insight and expertise. If anyone's got any additional questions, you can contact us directly using the contact information in your webinar registration. I thank you for your time this evening. Have a lovely evening.